Welcome to Through the Bible with Les Feldick, a 30-minute walk through the Scriptures teaching in-depth Bible truths that change people's lives. Now, here's your host, Les Feldick.
Okay, let's go. All right, we'll take off. Sometimes I can't tell until the red light comes on, but it looks like it is. All right, for those of you out in television, that's all part of being in the studio. We just roll with the punches. Sometimes it doesn't always go exactly right. But if you've joined us, we're an informal Bible study, and I stress the informal. See, that's why things don't bother me. And again, we'd like to thank every one of you for your prayers, your financial help, and your mail, your letter. We love mail time, don't we, honey? It's getting longer and longer part of the day, but it's worth it. And we appreciate so much your comments. Okay, for those of you here in the studio audience, again, we like to always thank you folks for putting forth the effort, coming in. And we just have a good afternoon, don't we? Pretty good. Okay, now let's go back to where we left off. Oh, I'm in book 61. I made it. We're in book 61. So if you're interested in any part of these programs, either the video, the book, or whatever, just call and ask the girls for book or video number 61. Okay, back where we left off in Isaiah 54, we stopped with verse 7. Jerry's got 8 on the board, but let's go up to verse 7 for just a second. For a small moment, God says, for just a little bit of time. But like I pointed out at the end of the last program, how long has it been? About 3,000 years that Israel has been going through tough times. And, they'd have certain periods of relative quiet, but most of the time the nation has been under turmoil, under the hatred of all the other nations of the world, and still waiting for the day when they will finally have their Messiah. See, now that's why every Jew of any spiritual worth at all, their favorite saying is what? Next year, Jerusalem. And I always get a thrill out of the picture when they first captured the Temple Mount in the Six-Day War, and how those Israeli young soldiers, you could just tell they were kids, 18, 20-year-olds, and they were just celebrating that they had finally gotten the Temple Mount. And known only to God why the Israeli general at that time, Dayan, gave it back to the Muslims. He could have just kept it for Israel, but I guess he thought he was trying to maintain good relations, whatever, but he gave it back to the control of the Muslims, and so it's been ever since. But nevertheless, they have always had a heart cry for a return to the city of Jerusalem. All right, but the day will come. It's still out in the future, but it will come. All right, so verse 7 again, for a small moment I have forsaken thee, but with great mercy I will gather thee. And so this is the hope of Israel. One day they are still going to have all these Old Testament promises fulfilled, and Christ himself will be their King. Now let's go on into verse 8. In a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment, for a little while. But with everlasting kindness I will have mercy on thee, saith the Lord. Now there's comparativeness. Here 3,000 years compared to eternity is what? A moment. Now see, none of us can have a concept of eternity. It's just beyond us. But eternity is eternity is eternity. And 3,000 years of time as we know it is just nothing. All right? And so he makes this comparison now then. Verse 9. For this is as the waters of Noah, the Noahic flood. For as I have sworn that the waters of Noah should no more go over the earth, so I have sworn that I would not be angry with thee nor rebuke thee. Now what's the comparison again? As soon as the floodwaters left and the rainbow appeared, what did God tell Noah? That's my covenant promise, the bow in the sky, that I will never again destroy planet Earth with water. And that's what we're to be reminded of whenever you see the rainbow, that's God's covenant promise with mankind, that he will never again destroy the earth with water. All right, has he? No. And will he? No. But what's the reason for it here? to make the comparison, neither will he ever give up on Israel. They may rebel, they may be wicked, they may be sinful, they may be guilty of unbelief, but God will not give up on His chosen people. All right, let's go back again and look at some scripture verses. Let's go back to 2 Samuel chapter 7. Because this is one of the first promises that this is exactly the way it's going to be. That Israel will be rebellious, they'll be sinful and wicked, but God will never withdraw His mercy from the nation. All right, 2 Samuel chapter 7, and he's being spoken by God through the prophet Nathan to David. Verse 14, honey. 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 14. Now here's the promise that God makes to David concerning the nation. Not just Solomon by himself, but the whole nation. 2 Samuel 7, verse 14. God says, I will be his father, and he shall be my son. Now he's speaking here of the nation of Israel. If he commit iniquity, and we know they have and they will, if he commit iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men. And what do you mean there? Invading armies. The enemies that would overrun them over and over and over again, see? And with the stripes of the children of men, he would punish them. But now verse 15, what's the first word? But the flip side, my mercy shall not depart away from him. In other words, God will never give up on the nation of Israel. All right, now let's just jump up to Jeremiah a moment. And again, as I mentioned in our last program, there may be those who think God is all through with the Jew. They may think that everything ended in 70 AD. But I got a question for them. Then what are you going to do with these verses? This is the Word of God. You can't just throw it out and say, well, God has forgotten about it. No, He hasn't. Jeremiah 31, and drop down to verse 35. Now this is the promise of God concerning His earthly people. Jeremiah chapter 31, and we'll drop in at verse 35. All got it? Thus saith the Lord. Well, that's all you need, isn't it? God said it. The Lord who giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon and the stars for a light by night, which divide the sea when the waves thereof roar. And I think that has a reference to the tide. You know, whenever we're on a seacoast area, that's the one thing that still intrigues me. The tides. I just can't fathom it. That everything is so meticulously timed that they can set up schedules of the tides way in advance. Unbelievable. But again, here's a reference to it, see? That the sea with the tides and the waves thereof roar, the Lord of hosts his name. Now verse 36, if those ordinances depart, in other words, if all of a sudden the tides would stop going in and out, all right? Or if the sun or the moon should suddenly cease to function. If those ordinances depart from before me, saith the Lord, then the seed of Israel shall cease from being a nation. But they haven't departed. And Israel hasn't stopped being a nation, nor will they. Because, verse 37, thus saith the Lord, if heaven above can be measured, and I think he's speaking of the heaven of the heavens, the abode of God. He's not just talking about space as we know that. He's talking about the abode of God himself. If that can be measured, if man can figure out where it's at and find out the distance and everything, but it'll never happen. All right, if that can be measured and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, then God says, I will cast off the seed of Israel for all that they have done. But he won't, because the promises are steadfast and sure that all of these promises are going to be fulfilled. Again, let's jump all the way up to Zechariah. Zechariah, one of the great prophecy books in the Old Testament other than Isaiah. Zechariah chapter 14. Now I start verse 1. because this is what the world is getting ready for tonight. The whole world, the planet, either in the natural forces of earthquakes and volcanoes and tidal waves and the power of weather, or whether it's man-made weapons of mass destruction, everything is getting ready for these final moments of human history. And here's where Zechariah culminates. It's what we call the Battle of Armageddon. And it'll be the last great push that Satan will push against the eternal coming Christ. All right, verse 1 of Zechariah 14. These are all still future. Hasn't happened yet, but it's going to. The world is getting ready for it. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh. Thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. That is the nation of Israel now. This is all spoken to Israel. For I will gather all nations, the whole world. Now you talk about a coalition. This is going to be a coalition and then some. All the nations will gather against Jerusalem to battle. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished. Sound familiar? That's warfare. That's the residue of armies. All right, and half the city shall go into captivity, the rest shall not be cut off. Verse 3, then, when it seems as though Jerusalem will disappear from history, then shall the Lord go forth, the second coming of Christ, and he will fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. Well, we know what's going to happen from the book of Revelation. He's going to annihilate those nations brought together by the Antichrist. And this will introduce then his peaceful appearance to set up the kingdom. Verse 4, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. The Mount of Olives? Does everybody know the Mount of Olives? Well, I hope you do. Every tour we've ever taken to Israel, that's one of our stops, and we hope to go again next spring. And we'll be standing on the Mount of Olives. All right, now jump with me. Keep your hand in Zechariah, and let's just jump up to Acts, because what I like to prove to people over and over is how these Old Testament prophecies, whenever they're referred to in the New, are so explicitly, simply put that nobody can argue with it. Acts chapter 1. And this is when the Lord has just finished his 40 days in the resurrected body with the 12, or the 11 rather, and they're now meeting on the Mount of Olives. And I'm sure these 11 men have no idea of what is about to happen. They just think it's another one of their confabs with the Lord. But then all of a sudden, verse 9, when he had finished speaking the things in verse 8, while they beheld, just all of a sudden with no forewarning, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. They watched him go. Now verse 10, and while they looked steadfastly toward heaven, watching him leave from the Mount of Olives, as he went up, behold, 2 men stood by them in white apparel, who also said, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, now watch this, this same Jesus in that resurrected body, the nail prints in his hands, who has been now with them for 40 days, walking, talking, eating, and this same Jesus who is taken up from you into heaven shall so come in like manner as you have seen him go into heaven. Now, do you have to have a theological degree to understand that? Why, it's as simple as can be. Now flip back to Zechariah, and isn't that the same thing? Now Zechariah foretold this 500 years before Christ. Almost like before it happened, or after it happened. Let's read it again. Zechariah 14, verse 4. And his feet, the returning Christ, his feet will stand in that day. He's not going to come in an invisible spirit. He's not going to come like an ethereal cloud or like an angel of some sort. It's going to be the resurrected Christ, the same one the 12 watched go into heaven. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem. So we know it's the same one. And he's going to come and stand on the Mount of Olives, which in turn will be separated to make way for a glorious river of fresh water running between the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea. We pick that up now in verse 8. Still in Zechariah 14, verse 8. And it shall be in that day when Christ sets up his throne room in Jerusalem, that living water, fresh water, shall go out from Jerusalem, half to the former sea, the Mediterranean, half toward the hinder sea, that is the Dead Sea, out to the east, in summer, in winter. In other words, it's going to be an ongoing thing year-round. And the Lord, verse 9, and the Lord shall be king over what? All the earth. Now that's plain and simple. He's going to establish an earthly kingdom. As we saw in the first program today, Israel will be the top dog of the nations. They will never again have to ask somebody else for help. Instead, they'll help others, and they're going to have their Messiah as their king. Israel is going to be blessed beyond all the other nations. It's coming. And in that day, there shall be one Lord, and his name one. All right, now then let's come back to Isaiah. We'll make a little headway. Chapter 54 again. Again, verse 9. I think this is a good verse to just remind yourself of the eternalness of our God. Now, you see, the water was on the earth how long with Noah? Yeah, a little over a year before it started receding. All right? So the waters of Noah was just like nothing compared to this nation of Israel. All right? So even though he had sworn that the waters of Noah should no more go over the earth, so have I sworn that I would not be angry with thee, nor rebuke thee. Why? Verse 10. For the mountains shall depart and the hills move. This is all supernatural activity. But my kindness shall not depart from thee, neither shall the covenant of my peace be removed, saith the Lord, that hath mercy on thee. All these promises for Israel will one day come to fruition. All right, but now we come back to their state of unbelief and their wickedness, and as they're being afflicted. Verse 11, O thou afflicted, tossed with tempest, and not comforted. See all this before they can have the blessings of the kingdom? But look what's coming. Behold, I will lay thy stones with fair colors. I'll lay thy foundations with sapphires. Now, I'm sure this is all in symbolism, but actually it may become literal when the throne room is brought here to Jerusalem, that all these beautiful gemstones will be part and parcel of the building of it. But either way, it just makes for glorious reading to see how God is going to bless his covenant people one day. All right, I will make thy windows of agates, and thy gates of carbuncles, which are a bright red stone, and all thy borders of pleasant stones. And all thy children shall be taught of the Lord, and great shall be the peace of thy children. In righteousness shalt thou be established. Thou shalt be far from oppression, for thou shalt not fear, and from terror, for it shall not come near thee. Now remember, this is all such an opposite scenario from what the Jews have experienced over these last 3,000 years of their history. Verse 15, Behold, they shall surely gather together, but not by me. Whosoever shall gather together against thee shall fall for thy sake. Now, whenever the nations of the world turn on Israel, you can just bet whatever you want to bet that the adversaries of Israel are going to be the losers, because God is not going to let anyone touch Israel without his design. All right? Verse 16, Behold, I have created the smith. Now we're talking about a blacksmith with his forge. I have created the blacksmith who blows the coals in the fire. That's the forge, to heat the metal. I am the one that bringeth forth an instrument for his work, whatever the blacksmith is making. Now, in antiquity, that would usually be swords and spears. All right, so if that is what he's talking about, then he says he has also created the waster, or the military person that will use these weapons. And he's going to have the waster to destroy. But, now verse 17, no weapon that is formed against thee, Israel, shall prosper. Every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment, thou shalt condemn. You see, this is why I have begged anyone I've taught for the last 30 years. You pray every day for God's people Israel, and He'll bless you for it. Write your congressman, call them. Don't ever turn against the nation of Israel. They are God's promises. And the promises are that if we turn against them, we're going to fall. And I'm sure that in spite of our wickedness, this is why God has blessed America. And so never forget these promises, that God will bless them that bless Israel. He will curse them who curse Israel. All right? Now then, this is the heritage, verse 17, of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness of me, saith the Lord. In other words, He is in control of everything. All right, now we're going to go right into chapter 55, and all of a sudden, just like Paul does up in the New Testament, here the prophet shifts gears. Now, instead of looking forward to the glories of the kingdom, after having gone through the years of turmoil, now we go into the glory of God's saving grace. This is a salvation chapter again. Ho, everyone that thirsteth, come ye to the waters. Now stop and think a minute. What does that remind you of? What did the Lord tell in His own earthly ministry of Himself? Come and drink of me, and you'll never thirst again. Well, He is the living water. You go back into Numbers, when Israel was thirsty and their herds were bellowing with thirst. What did He tell Moses to do? Strike the rock. And out of that rock came rivers of water to water the millions of Israelites plus all their livestock. Well, who was the rock? Christ. He's the rock of Scripture. And so out of Him came living water. And here we have it again. Israel is invited to come and drink of the waters of salvation that God will freely give. Because, look at the rest of the verse, these waters are for that person who has no money. Come, buy and eat, yea, come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why? Because God's salvation is free. And it's the same way today. You can't work for it. I just spent minutes again the other night with someone, brainwashed, that they think they have to work. I said, can't you trust the cross? Yeah, but they got to work for it. It's just unbelievable. Because you see, as soon as you have to work for salvation, what human being can know if they've done enough? Well, you can't. So consequently, whenever you ask someone who is basing their going to heaven on their works, you ask them, are you sure you're going to go to heaven when you die? And what's their invariable answer? I hope so. I hope I've done enough. But they can never know. But see, you and I don't have to hope so. We know so. Not because we're so good, not because we've done so much, but because we've done nothing. And God has done it all. And that's all God wants is faith. Believe it. But man says, but I got to do something. And see, here this verse makes it so plain that even in the Old Testament economy, salvation was free. It didn't cost. All right, we got a couple minutes left. Let's go on into verse 22. Why do you spend money for that which is not bread? It's of no use. And your labor for that which satisfieth not? Now, what's he referring to? Materialism. Look at the world around us. We are saturated with materialism. And it's all our younger generation can think about. A bigger house, a better car, more activity for their kids. Well, that's all well and good as far as it goes. But listen, beloved, that in itself never satisfies. It's worthless. Now, after we've gained salvation and we have all these precious spiritual promises, yes, God doesn't tell us that we have to live like hermits. God doesn't tell us to move into what's the word I'm looking for? Where'd the monks stay? Boy, I'm getting old, aren't I? We don't have to move into some monastery. That's the word I'm looking for. We don't have to go into a monastery and be isolated. No. But we do have to have our priorities straight, realizing that salvation costs nothing and that it's free, and that once we have it, then we can go and certainly enjoy the things that God has blessed us with. All right, a couple minutes, let's move on. Your labor for that which satisfieth not, hearken diligently unto me. Now in verse 2, eat you that which is good, and let your soul delight itself in fatness, that is in spiritual blessings, see? Now verse 3, incline your ear. Listen to what God has got to say. Incline your ear and come unto me. Hear, and your soul shall live. And I will make an everlasting covenant with you, even the sure mercies of David. Now never forget, he's talking here to Jews. Now we can certainly take application, but the actual text is for the nation of Israel. All right, now verse 4, behold, I have given him, David, a man after God's own heart. I have given him for a witness to the people, a leader and a commander to the people. Behold, thou shalt call a nation that thou knowest not, and nations that knew not thee shall run unto thee, because the Lord thy God and the Holy One of Israel for the glory. Now there again, I think that's just a reference to those verses we saw earlier, that when Israel finally enjoys her king and that glorious earthly kingdom, all the nations of the world are going to be blessed through Israel. It's going to be Israel's king that's ruling. And so Israel is again the hub of the wheel, and all the nations of the world will be blessed through that blessed covenant nation of Israel, over whom Christ, God the Son, their King, will be ruling and reigning. And not just for 1,000 years, it'll be forever and ever.
Thank you for watching Through the Bible with Les Feldick. Through the Bible is a partner-supported ministry. If this program has been a help to your study of the Scriptures and you'd like to see others enjoy the teaching, your support would be greatly appreciated. Write to us at Les Feldick Ministries, 30706 West Lona Valley Road, Kinta, Oklahoma, 74552. Or call 1-800-369-7856. Be sure to tune in next time to Through the Bible with Les Feldick.